In a quiet neighborhood in Georgia, where magnolia trees cast dappled shadows across weathered porches, there lived a woman known simply as Mama Joe. This is the story of how she opened her door one evening to a bruised and frightened 10-year-old boy, and how that single act of kindness rippled through time, returning to her doorstep years later in ways she never could have imagined. If you've ever believed that small acts of kindness can change the course of a life, this story might just affirm your faith in humanity. Let us know where you're watching from, and if you've ever experienced a moment when someone's generosity altered the trajectory of a life. And welcome to In the Heartlight. Willow Street wasn't the kind of place that made it onto postcards. The asphalt had long since surrendered to cracks where determined dandelions pushed through, and the houses, modest one-story affairs with aluminum siding and faded pastels, had seen better days. But number 37, with its immaculate yard and window boxes spilling over with marigolds, stood as a quiet rebellion against time and circumstance. This was Mama Joe's house. Some folks called her the porch saint for the way she'd sit in her rocking chair each evening, offering waves and wisdom to anyone who passed by. Most simply called her Mama, a title she wore more naturally than her own name. At 60, Josephine Carter carried her years with dignity. Her dark skin had the soft luster of well-oiled wood, creased with lines that mapped a lifetime of expressions, mostly laughter, though she'd known her share of sorrows. Her hands, strong with slightly swollen knuckles, were rarely still, always cooking or mending or reaching out to steady someone who needed steadying. She lived alone, though by choice rather than circumstance. Her husband, Samuel, had passed some years back. Her children, 3 sons and a daughter, had scattered across different states, pursuing dreams that had outgrown their small Georgia town. They called regularly and visited when they could, bringing grandchildren who would swarm her like happy bees. But Mama Joe never felt lonely. She had a way about her that made you feel like you belonged, even if you were just passing by. The walls of her home had soaked in decades of laughter, gospel music, and the sweet scent of baked cornbread. She had always believed that the front door was never meant to be a barrier, but a bridge. A philosophy that would soon be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. Evening settled over Willow Street like a familiar quilt. Mama Joe hummed a hymn as she stirred a pot of gumbo, thick and fragrant, every motion of her hand a quiet ritual of love. In the oven, cornbread was turning golden, its buttery scent mingling with the savory stew. A radio on her countertop played soft gospel, providing gentle company as she moved around her kitchen with practiced grace. She was just reaching for a wooden spoon to taste the gumbo when she heard it, a sound so soft she might have missed it if the radio hadn't been between songs. A knock at the door, gentle, hesitant, almost apologetic in its quietness. When she opened the door, the warm light from her living room spilled out onto the porch, illuminating a sight that stopped her breath. There, trembling in the September evening, stood a boy no more than 10 years old. His left eye was swollen, a bruise darkening his cheek. His too large t-shirt hung from thin shoulders, and his arms were mottled with bruises in various stages of healing. He clutched a ratty backpack to his chest like a shield. But it was his eyes that truly caught her. Wide, alert, with a wariness no child should possess, holding more fear and desperate hope than any young face should ever need to carry. "Please," the boy whispered, his voice cracking on that single word. "Please don't make me go." Something shifted in Mama Joe's chest, an ancient maternal instinct that needed no explanation. Without hesitation, she reached out her hand. "Child," she said, her voice soft but steady, "nobody's making you go anywhere tonight." Her kitchen was a sanctuary of warmth and light. The boy stood awkwardly by the table, still clutching his backpack, looking as out of place as a shadow in full sunlight. "Sit yourself down, honey," she said, pulling out a chair. "I'm Josephine Carter, but most everybody calls me Mama Joe." She placed a bowl of gumbo before him along with a spoon and a cloth napkin. "You like gumbo? Got okra and smoked sausage in it. And there's cornbread about to come out the oven." He nodded, barely perceptibly. "Go on," she encouraged. "Food's for eating, not for looking at." Slowly he began to eat, at first with caution, then with increasing eagerness that told its own story of hunger. Mama Joe let him eat in silence, recognizing the sacred nature of feeding a hungry child. When the edge had been taken off his hunger, Mama Joe sat down across from him with her own bowl of gumbo. "My, you are hungry," she said with a smile. "There's plenty more if you want." "Thank you, ma'am," he replied softly, polite in that careful way of children who have learned that survival depends on perfect manners. As he set down his spoon, the sleeve of his t-shirt rode up, revealing a bracelet of purple-yellow bruises around his wrist. The shape of fingers, adult fingers. "What's your name, baby?" she asked gently. The boy studied her face as if assessing whether it was safe to share even this small piece of himself. "James," he finally said. "James," she repeated, letting the name settle between them like a bridge. "That's a good, strong name. James, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to know that you're safe here. Can you tell me what happened? Who hurt you?" The boy's shoulders hunched forward. "Please don't call anybody," he whispered. "Please. I'll be good. I promise I'll be quiet. You won't even know I'm here." "James, look at me, honey." Reluctantly, he raised his eyes to meet hers. "I want you to hear me good now. You are not going back to whoever did this to you. Not tonight. Not ever if I have anything to say about it. You understand me? But I need to call someone who can help us properly. There's rules about these things, and we got to follow them so we can protect you right and legal." "They'll send me back," he said, barely audible. "They always do." "Not this time," Mama Joe said with quiet certainty. "I won't let that happen." Then his face crumpled, and silent tears began to track down his cheeks. In the living room, with one eye still on James in the kitchen, Mama Joe called the police station. "This is Josephine Carter over on Willow Street," she said, keeping her voice low. "I've got a situation here that needs careful handling. There's a boy at my house about 10 years old, name of James. He's hurt, bruises all over, including what looks like finger marks on his wrists. No, I don't want any sirens or uniforms showing up at my door and frightening him half to death," she said firmly. "Send someone who's trained in child welfare cases. And call Martha Smith from Social Services. She knows me from when I was teaching at Oakwood Elementary." After arranging for someone to come first thing in the morning, Mama Joe prepared the sofa with a soft quilt her grandmother had made, a log cabin pattern in blues and creams that had comforted 3 generations of children. Throughout that long night, Mama Joe kept vigil, alert to any sound from the living room. Twice she rose to check on him, finding him sleeping fitfully, sometimes twitching or murmuring in dreams she could only imagine. The soft gray light of dawn was filtering through the curtains when Mama Joe heard a car pull up outside. She opened the door to find Martha Smith standing on her porch, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm and concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "Josephine," she said warmly, keeping her voice low. "It's been a while." "Too long, Martha," Mama Joe replied, "though I wish it were under better circumstances." A small sound from the doorway made them both turn. James stood there, the quilt wrapped around his shoulders like a cape, his eyes darting between the 2 women. "This is Mrs. Smith," Mama Joe explained. "She's the lady I told you about who helps children." Martha smiled, but made no move toward him, understanding instinctively that space was what he needed most. After breakfast, while Martha took photographs and asked James careful questions, Mama Joe busied herself with washing dishes. When they finished, Martha came to find her in the kitchen, her face grim but professional. "Can we talk outside for a minute?" she asked. On the back porch, with the door closed behind them, Martha's composure cracked slightly. "It's bad, Joe," she said. "Systematic abuse likely going on for years. His father's in prison, drug charges, and his mother's boyfriend is the one who, she trailed off. James ran away yesterday after a particularly bad incident. His mother knows he's gone, but hasn't reported him missing. Says good riddance, according to what James overheard. Lord have mercy, Mama Jo whispered. I need to find him a foster placement, but it's complicated. We're overcrowded, and I want to make sure he goes somewhere safe. It might take a few days to arrange something suitable. They'll stay here, Mama Jo said immediately, for as long as you need. After Martha completed the necessary paperwork and promised to return in a week, Mama Jo showed James to what would be his room for the time being. It was small but comfortable, with a twin bed, a wooden dresser, and a desk by the window that overlooked the backyard. This was my nephew Andre's room when he stayed with me during college, she explained. The sheets are clean, and there's plenty of space for your things. They made a trip to the local department store, where Mama Jo efficiently guided him through selecting necessities. Socks, underwear, t-shirts, jeans that actually fit, a toothbrush, and a denim jacket for the cooling autumn weather. When Mama Jo added a notebook and set of colored pencils to their cart, he looked up at her questioningly. Every young person needs a place to put their thoughts, she said simply. Sometimes writing things down or drawing them helps make sense of what's happening inside. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm. Mama Jo didn't push James to talk about what had happened, understanding that trust would come in its own time, if at all. Instead, she focused on creating a space where he could simply be a child, perhaps for the first time. She showed him how to measure ingredients for cornbread, guiding his hands as they sifted flour and cornmeal. She taught him to read the weather in the sky and the behavior of birds, wisdom passed down from her own grandmother. At night, he would sometimes wake with a start, his breath coming in quick gasps that Mama Jo could hear from her room. The first time it happened, she found him sitting up in bed, rigid with fear. You're safe, James, she had whispered from the doorway. You're at Mama Jo's house on Willow Street. Nobody's gonna hurt you here. James's trust came in increments so small they were almost imperceptible. The way he would set the table without being asked. How he stopped checking the locks on windows every hour. The morning she found him sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunrise without his backpack nearby. On the third day, when she was kneeling in her garden, struggling with a particularly stubborn weed, a small hand appeared beside hers, grasping the plant firmly at its base. Like this? James asked quietly. Just like that, she confirmed with a smile. Pull straight up now. On the morning of the 6th day, Martha Smith's car pulled up in front of the house. James was helping Mama Jo hang laundry in the backyard, carefully matching clothespins to each item. At the sound of the car door, his head snapped up, and the familiar tension returned to his small frame. That'll be Mrs. Smith, Mama Jo said gently. Remember, she said she'd be back today. Martha outlined the foster placement she had arranged. The Millers are experienced foster parents, good people. They live near a good school with resources for children who've experienced trauma. Mama Jo nodded, trusting Martha's judgment but unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She had known from the start that James was not hers to keep, that her role was simply to provide safe harbor until a more permanent solution could be found. When James emerged from his room, his backpack was slung over his shoulder, looking fuller than when he had arrived. Mama Jo knelt despite the protest of her aging knees to meet his eyes. James, I want you to know something important. My door is always open to you. No matter what happens, no matter where you go, you always have a place here if you need it. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small card on which she had written her address and telephone number. You keep this with you, she said, pressing it into his palm. And you remember what I said? James nodded, carefully tucking the card into his jeans pocket. Then, he unzipped his backpack and pulled out the notebook. I wrote something, he said, his voice steadier than she had yet heard it. For you." He held out the notebook, open to a page where he had written in his careful slanting script, "You are seen, you are safe, you are somebody." Beneath these words was a simple drawing of a house with smoke curling from the chimney, a porch with a rocking chair and two figures standing side by side, one tall, one small. "I'll see you again?" he asked, the question mark painfully evident in his voice. "Count on it," Mama Jo replied firmly. "My door is always open, James, always." The silence in Mama Jo's house felt different after James left, heavier somehow, laden with echoes of the child who had briefly filled its rooms. Martha called weekly with updates. James was adjusting to the Miller home. The school counselor was working with him. He was eating well. What Martha couldn't see was how James would take out his notebook each morning before school and read Mama Jo's address to himself. How he kept her card taped inside the front cover. How he would write those 9 words at the top of a fresh page each day, like a talisman against fear. The Millers were kind but bewildered by this solemn boy who followed rules with rigid precision and flinched at raised voices. At school, he was quiet but attentive, earning good grades and avoiding trouble. His teachers noted his reluctance to participate in class discussions, but praised his written work. It was during a 6th grade debate on justice that something awakened in James. The question posed, "Is justice more about punishment or restoration?" sparked a fire in him that surprised everyone. Standing before his classmates, his voice rang out clear and unwavering as he argued that true justice healed rather than harmed, that it saw the person, not just the offense. Through middle school and into high school, debate became his sanctuary. Behind the scenes, he began to dream of becoming a lawyer, someone who could stand between the powerful and the powerless and make sure the rules protected those who needed protection most. The years passed. James graduated at the top of his class, earning a scholarship to college where he studied political science with a focus on restorative justice. Law school followed, where professors noted his uncommon combination of analytical precision and empathy. He clerked for respected judges, building a reputation for both brilliance and compassion. Through it all, he kept 2 things constant: his notebook ritual and the memories of those 6 days on Willow Street. Every achievement was measured against those 9 words that had become the foundation of his identity. You are seen. You are safe. You are somebody. Time continued its steady march on Willow Street. Mama Jo felt the years in her joints, especially on damp mornings. Her hands, once so deft with a needle and thread, now sometimes trembled. Silver had long since replaced the black in her hair, and reading required glasses perched on the end of her nose. At 78, she had slowed but not stopped. Her garden was smaller now, just herbs and a few tomato plants she could tend without too much bending. Her children called regularly and visited when they could, though her daughter, Evelyn, had tried to convince her to move to Atlanta, where she could be closer to family. "Got no business being anywhere else but right here," she would say. "This is where I belong." What she never said was the promise she had made 18 years ago to a small boy with bruises on his arms. "My door is always open." How could she keep that promise if she moved away? On a Tuesday morning in early May, Mama Jo retrieved a cream-colored envelope from her mailbox. The handwriting was unfamiliar, precise, elegant, the kind that suggested education and care. She carried it back to her porch and settled into her rocking chair before opening it. The paper inside was thick and creamy, bearing an embossed seal at the top. But it was the first line that caught her breath. Dear Mama Jo, only one person had ever called her that. Not Mama, as the neighborhood children did, but specifically Mama Jo. Her eyes raced ahead. You may not remember me, but 18 years ago I knocked on your door one evening, and you opened not just your home, but a future I could never have imagined. My name is James Mitchell, and I was that scared 10-year-old boy you sheltered when I had nowhere else to turn. I've thought about writing this letter many times, but somehow the words never seemed adequate. How do you thank someone who gave you back your humanity? How do you explain that 6 days can change the entire direction of a life? What I can tell you is this. Last week, I was appointed as a federal judge for the Northern District of Georgia. When I took my oath to uphold justice, I was thinking of you and the justice you showed to a stranger at your door. In my swearing-in speech, I intend to mention your name and what you taught me about true justice, that it begins with seeing people, truly seeing them, even when they are at their most vulnerable. If you object to this public acknowledgement, please call me. But I hope you will allow me to honor you in this small way, as I have honored your example throughout my career. The ceremony will be broadcast online next Monday at 11 a.m. With deepest gratitude, your son, James Blaze. Below his signature was a phone number and an address in Atlanta. Mama Jo read the letter 3 times before its full meaning penetrated. James, her James, was alive and well. More than well. A federal judge. The boy who had arrived bruised and terrified was now in a position to administer the very justice he had been denied as a child. Tears slipped down her cheeks, dropping onto the expensive paper in her hands. Your son, he had signed it. Your son. The following Monday found Mama Jo sitting nervously in her living room, dressed in her Sunday best. Michael Lewis, the teenage son of her neighbor, helped set up his laptop so she could watch the ceremony online. At precisely 11 o'clock, several distinguished-looking individuals in dark robes filed onto the platform. And there, among them, was James. The frightened boy had become a tall, dignified man with shoulders that carried authority as naturally as they had once carried fear. His face had lost all traces of childhood, but his eyes remained the same, serious and observant. When it was James's turn to address the gathering, Mama Jo reached out unconsciously and gripped Michael's hand. I stand before you today deeply honored and humbled, James began, his voice rich and measured. The path that led me to this moment has been shaped by many hands, professors, mentors, colleagues who believed in me. He paused, his gaze seeming to look beyond the immediate audience. But there's one person without whom I would not be standing here today. 18 years ago, I was a 10-year-old boy running from abuse, with nowhere to go. On that night, I knocked on the door of a woman named Josephine Carter, known to her neighborhood as Mama Jo. For 6 days, she gave me shelter, safety, and most importantly, dignity. She taught me that justice begins not in courtrooms, but in how we see each other. Truly see each other, especially those who are vulnerable and afraid. She wrote 9 words in a notebook that I have carried with me through every step of my journey. You are seen. You are safe. You are somebody. These words became the foundation of my understanding of justice. That true justice sees people in their full humanity, creates safety for the vulnerable, and acknowledges the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of their circumstances. When the ceremony concluded, Mama Jo sat alone in her quiet house, James's letter in her hands once more. She had lived long enough to know that life rarely offered such perfect circles, such complete resolutions. Most acts of kindness disappeared into the world like stones into water, the ripples eventually fading without witness. To see the impact of her actions after so many years felt like a rare and precious gift. As the sun began to set, casting long golden fingers through her front windows, Mama Jo heard a car pull up outside. From it emerged a tall figure in a suit, carrying what looked like a bouquet of flowers. James Mitchell stood on her porch, much as he had nearly 2 decades before, but everything else had changed. The frightened boy was now a composed man in his late 20s, broad-shouldered and straight-backed. He wore a well-tailored suit, and in his hands were sunflowers, bright, bold flowers that seemed to capture the moment in their upturned faces. Mama Jo, James said, his voice deep but touched with the same vulnerability she remembered. James, she whispered, my boy. He stepped forward then, and she opened her arms to him, the bouquet crushed between them as they embraced. Inside, as evening turned to night, James reached into his suit jacket and withdrew an envelope similar to the one she had received the week before. "I didn't come just to visit," he said. "I came because there's something I want to do, something I've been thinking about for years." Inside were legal documents. James Mitchell was filing to legally adopt Josephine Carter as his mother. "I know it's unusual," he said quickly. "Most adoptions go the other way around. But I wanted you to know that in my heart, you've been my mother since that first night when you opened your door. This would just make official what has always been true." "James," she said softly, "are you sure?" "I'm here because I want my mother with me for my life," he said simply. "Not just as a memory or an influence, but legally, officially as family." "I've always thought of you as mine," she admitted quietly. "From that very first night. Some children grow under your heart and some grow in it. You've been in mine for 18 years. James reached out and took her weathered hands in his. "Then say yes, Mama. Let me make it official." "Yes," she whispered, squeezing his hands. "Yes." Later, as they sat on her porch watching the stars appear, James looked over at the elderly woman who had saved him. "Most people would say I've had a remarkable journey, from an abused runaway to a federal judge. But the truth is, the most remarkable part happened right here, on this porch, when you opened your door to a stranger." "Wasn't no stranger," Mama Joe replied with quiet certainty, "just family I hadn't met yet." This time, when he called her Mama, there was no hesitation, no question mark at the end. Only the sure knowledge of belonging. As the stars continued their silent journey across the Georgia sky, the woman and the man, now officially mother and son, sat together on a porch on Willow Street, their lives connected by a single act of kindness that had rippled outward through time, changing not just their own stories, but potentially thousands of others. For James Mitchell would carry Mama Joe's lessons of true seeing, true safety, and human worth into every courtroom decision. And Mama Joe would live out her remaining years secure in the knowledge that the doors we open, to strangers, to compassion, to hope, sometimes lead to the most profound blessings of all. This story reminds us that kindness is never wasted, that small actions can cascade through time in ways we cannot imagine, and that family is found not just in blood but in the sacred space where one human truly sees another. For in the end, we are all just people standing at various thresholds, hoping that when we knock, someone like Mama Joe will open the door and say, "Come in. You are seen. You are safe. You are somebody." Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to In the Heartlight for more inspiring tales of everyday heroes. And don't forget to check out the videos currently on your screen. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.